Has anyone heard this one before? World of Warcraft has more raiding content than Final Fantasy XIV. I've actually heard this sentiment reflected a few times now, and I just don't know where it comes from. The only logical leap I can make is, maybe it feels that way due to how the content is paced in Final Fantasy XIV. In a World of Warcraft major patch, there are many raid bosses included, usually around 10 or so. When you look at a patch from Final Fantasy XIV, there are fewer raid bosses released. But does that mean there are less bosses in the expansion overall? That is what I wanted to look at today, so let's dive straight in and see just how much raiding content these two games get. A caveat before we get started, I am using Shadowbringers and Shadowlands as the control. Those are the two most recent expansions of these games, and I think a good way to gauge this. World of Warcraft Shadowlands is coming up to its last major patch for the expansion as we speak, which would be patch 9.2, and the number of raid encounters for the final tier has not been released as of this recording, so we will have to do some guesswork. And with that out of the way, let's get started. So, the first way I would like to compare these two would be the number of unique raid encounters. Now, we are going to limit this to encounters within an instance, so world bosses in WoW and fates from Final Fantasy XIV will not be counted. So let's start with Final Fantasy XIV. You have the 3 Eden raid tiers, each tier with 4 encounters. That's a total of 12 encounters. You have the 8 trial encounters. We are not counting Unreals because those are just scaled up versions of old fights. And then there's also the Alliance raids, which you have the Copied Factory, which has 4 bosses, the Puppet's Bunker, which has another 4 bosses, and finally the Tower at Paradigm's Breach, which has, you guessed it, another 4 bosses. And lastly, the Epic of Alexander. That brings the total up to 33 unique boss fights. Or is it? There are actually even more to consider. You have Castrum Lacus Latour, the Delrida, and Delubrum Regane boss fights as well. Castrum has 3 bosses, Delubrum has 5 bosses, and Delrida has 4 bosses. That is 12 more boss fights to add on to the 33 previously mentioned, bringing the total up to 45. Now that is quite a few boss fights. So now let's take a look at World of Warcraft. Right now, in Shadowlands, there are 20 raid encounters. Castle Nathria has 10, and Sanctum of Domination has another 10. The last raid, Sepulture of the First Ones, hasn't had its final count released as of this recording. But let's say it will also be around 10. That gives you around 30 encounters in Shadowlands. So, the final tallies are 30 unique boss fights for Shadowlands, and 45 unique boss fights for Shadowbringers, meaning Shadowbringers has, by the power of math, 15 more unique boss fights. So, it looks like Final Fantasy XIV takes the lead here. But, as I said before, we do not know how many encounters, as of yet, that Shadowlands will have. So, this is a guess, but I'm going to assume it won't be a 16 boss raid tier. So, we went over unique encounters, but I know that some raiders only care about the hardest content. Content that is meant to be progressed on over a period of time. So, that would take out some of the encounters we tallied up before. Now, when we look at World of Warcraft, that means the mythic level for raids. Since there's a mythic level for all the raid encounters, that would bring that total up to around 30, depending on how many encounters 9.2 actually winds up getting. Final Fantasy XIV's comparable difficulty is the Savage and Ultimate raids. When you look at that, Shadowbringers has 12 Savage encounters found in the Eden raids, 5 Savage encounters from Delubrum Regane, and 1 Ultimate fight, making the total count 18. Now, if we decided to include the Extreme mode, which is the hardest difficulty for the trials, then that number jumps up to 26. I think Extremes should be counted, since they are hard and many groups will need to progress on them, sometimes for many, many hours. I know that Extreme is easier than Savage, and that's why I could argue for counting it and not counting it. So, we are either at 18 or 26 in Final Fantasy XIV, depending on what you want to count. Either way, World of Warcraft comes out in the lead when we are counting only the hard raid encounters. Another thing to consider is this. In Final Fantasy XIV, the Savage fights are all 10 plus minutes. When you look at the Ultimate fight, that is around 18 minutes. Now, that might be a negative to some players. I know not everyone enjoys long boss fights, but I thought it was something worth mentioning. Now, generally speaking, encounters are shorter in World of Warcraft. Now, don't get me wrong, WoW has had some long encounters, but generally, they tend to be shorter than what is found in FF14. The other thing, which might just be me, but I feel like the way the fights look and feel between normal and savage, they look and feel so different. Now, don't get me wrong, in World of Warcraft, between Heroic and Mythic, the fights are different. You have to employ different strategies to win, and there are new mechanics to handle. But, in my experiences, the fights really don't have that, oh my god, this is so different, until you are getting near the end of the tier, the last few boss fights. The way Final Fantasy XIV is able to up the cinematic quality and epic feel of the raid encounters on Savage is really next level. That's all that I was trying to get at. So, when it came to unique boss fights, Final Fantasy XIV came out way ahead. Unless in World of Warcraft's patch 9.2 they make an insanely large raid. When it comes to the amount of hard content, progression-based content, well, World of Warcraft pulls ahead. The point, though, is that no matter how you look at it, Final Fantasy XIV is not slouching when it comes to raiding content. Even if you are looking at it from the perspective of how much progression content there is, when you factor that encounters are on average longer fights, and the ultimate encounter, I don't know. Final Fantasy XIV starts to look pretty strong, and it's not as clear-cut as it may have first looked. So, that is all for today. What do you all think of the amount of raiding content Final Fantasy XIV has? I'm happy with what we get. I think at the end of the day, what really matters is, are you having fun? And I am having a blast. Anyways, as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. Please consider leaving a like, commenting, and subscribing. Thanks again, and take care.